and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Mark, the 10th chapter. This is where we will spend our time. Half of this passage is one of those that's really pleasant to us because it's so warm and fuzzy. Such a reminder of how God looks at us as little children, as opposed to God being the Father in heaven that's just always waiting for us to mess up, to whack us across the back of the head. I remember being a kid, that was my father's method when I was growing up. When I was messing up at the table, I'd get thumped on the back of the head. But there's also in this passage a hard saying as well that we need to reckon with. And this is the way God is. I mean, we talked about it a little bit in Sunday school. There are contrasting elements to God's personality as He relates to us. As Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet, said, God fulfills Himself in many ways. I think that's right. Let's take a look at the text. In Mark chapter 10, I'll begin reading in verse 13. People were bringing little children to Jesus for Him to touch, but the disciples scolded those who brought the children. When Jesus saw the disciples doing this, He was indignant and said, "Let the little children come to me and don't try to stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, that whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." He took the little children in His arms, He placed His hands on them and blessed them. Now as Jesus started out on His way, somebody ran up to Him and fell on his knees and said, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said, "Why do you call me good? Nobody's good except God alone. You know the commandments. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't give false testimony, don't defraud, honor your father and your mother." The man said, "Teacher, I have wholeheartedly obeyed all of this since my youth." Well, Jesus looked at the man and felt love for him and said, "You lack one thing, however. Go and sell whatever you have, give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me." But at this statement, the man looked very sad and walked away sorrowful, for he was very rich. Then Jesus looked around at His disciples and said, "How hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven." What a contrast. You've got the little children who just run up to Jesus, and then you've got this rich man who's come to Jesus and walks away sorrowful. And yet, I'm going to say these two people, these two groups, if you want to look at them that way, are very, very similar to each other. It seems to me, just on the basis of the chapter previous in this one, and what you see in the other Gospels, is Jesus is very attractive to little children. There's just something about Him. They love Him. They want to come up and jump into His arms. I mean, if He teaches, the reason, and you notice something here about the text, this tells you something. Anytime a rabbi taught, he sat down. That's the way they taught. When you saw the rabbi sit, now the teaching begins. And so it makes sense that they run into His arms because He's seated. He's seated when He teaches. And the disciples here, this is amazing to me. It's been just a short time since they got this lesson, and they've already forgotten it. Just that quick. Very little has happened between the last time Jesus talked to them about little children and this time when He talks to them about little children. There are qualities of children that God, if I'm looking at this text correctly, seems to really enjoy. And I think that's right. I think it's no accident that we enjoy them when we see them in little children, because we're made in God's image. The first quality that I see in little children, and you all know this to be true, is that they are dependent. They are very dependent. Up until certain ages, they can't survive without adults inputting into their lives. That dependency draws something out of us, doesn't it, when we see a dependent child? I remember reading about, and it's not an accident, I remember reading about a woman who was a missionary who went to the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union. And she went to an orphanage. And when she went in, the orphanage, as most of them are broken up into age groupings. You know, you've got room for this age and rooms for this age. This was the room full of cribs where you had everything from newborns to small toddlers. And when she went in there, she said there were about 60 or 70 cribs all lined up. And they were in neat rows so that the people who serviced the children could get around the cribs. And when she went in, she said what she noticed was, obviously the tiny infants, they don't really respond too much, but the toddlers, she said they just sat in the cribs when we came into the room and stared blankly ahead. She couldn't understand why. And she said she went over to one of them and picked one up, and the child, she said, almost choked her, holding onto her neck. And so when she finally put the child back in the crib, she asked the nurse what's going on. The nurse said, there are only 3 of us that service all these cribs. She said, we don't have time to go around and pick them up. Children are dependent on us not only for sustenance, but also for that contact, that affection. If children don't get that, it changes who they are. These children were very changed by that. They're also very receptive to being taught. And they look at you and me as adults as those who know. They just trust you. Why does the bird swoop down onto the ground and pick up the worm, Daddy or Mommy or Uncle or Aunt or Granddaddy or Grandma or whoever it is? They want to know, and they believe that you and I have those answers. They are receptive to that, and they see knowledge in us. They are accepting of themselves for a while. They really are. I mean, you know, a kid comes out of the room with nothing on, and there's a whole room full of people. The kid doesn't think anything about it. What's going on in here? You know, there's nothing about it. They're not ashamed. They're not worried. Kid comes out in the yard, ties a cape around, a towel around their neck, and runs around the yard with a sword. It's funny to us. To the kid, it's just fun. And they're not concerned about how they look. They accept themselves very much so as they are. Even when you have children who have some kind of physical anomaly that everybody can see, they accept themselves that way. They don't have any sense of, I'm weird. They accept their position in life as well. There's a natural humility with children. They accept the fact that they are here and adults are here. They naturally accept it. Now I know that as life goes on, they come to the age where they accept it less and less, but that's part of growing up, right? We expect some of that. But when they're little, they look to the adults to be in charge. They just accept their position in life. And they're uninhibited. They believe that people are generally good. There's an innocence about them that draws us in. I will never forget once, this was a shock to me. I was dumbstruck when it happened. We got a phone call. Jackson was in kindergarten. And sorry I used Jackson as the illustration. He's the only child we have, and so I would make something up, I suppose, about somebody else's kid, but this is the one that I know something about. We got a phone call, you need to come get your son. I thought, oh no, what has he done? Has he fallen through a window and he's cut? He's got to go to the hospital? Is he sick? What's going on? No, he said a bad word. I thought, well, okay, I mean, we'll go there. So I remember going there and I asked the teacher, I said, what did he say? She said, well, and I'll describe it for you. She described the nether reaches where those who aren't saved go. But he didn't use the word in the context of describing it as the netherworld. He used it in a sentence. And so I thought, okay. She told me what he said, and I thought to myself, you know, Becky and I don't talk like that at home. I mean, where'd he hear that? And we found out later on he'd heard it on television. He just heard it, you know, common TV. Picked it up and decided, hey, the adult on TV said it, so I'll go say it at kindergarten, and he got sent home. I didn't care what he'd done. Didn't bother me in the least. What bothered me was he was robbed of a little bit of his innocence right then and there. Now there are these 3 consonants and a vowel that he has to learn how to avoid. That just tore me up. Now what are the qualities of the rich guy here in this text? Well, he's independent, right? He's got everything he needs. He doesn't need anything at all. He's not particularly receptive. He's got a limit to what he'll receive. If you try to teach this guy something, here's Jesus after all. I mean, this isn't just Joe Lunchbox. This is Jesus. He's not receptive to what all Jesus would speak to him. Why? The world has wounded him. We all go through that. We go through a period of life as we grow up. Pretty soon, all of the good things, the qualities of children leave us, and some of the bad qualities of being an adult come in because the world wounds us. Slowly but surely, the world will wound us. He doesn't accept himself except in the present state in which he is as a rich guy. He doesn't want to be other than a rich guy. That's how he accepts who he is. It's part of his identity in the world. I mean, the text says they all knew it, that he was rich. I don't imagine that he came up and showed him his bank account statement. He probably looked to be a rich person. He's proud of his position in life. How do I know that? Because everybody knows he's rich, right? I mean, when you drive up in the Bentley, everybody knows you've got at least enough money to buy that car. So you're not somebody who's a subsistence farmer in Mexico with 9 children. You're somebody else. He is inhibited in having the prestige that he has. He doesn't want to release it. He doesn't want to let it go. Now, there are important contrasts between these two comparisons here. You've got the rich guy and the children. The rich man is bored. You might think, well, how do you know that? He's looking for something. He's looking for something he doesn't have. He's rich. What would he possibly want that he doesn't have? He's looking for something he doesn't have. Children, on the other hand, you throw a kid down in the middle of the floor with 3 crayons and a sheet of paper, and they're not bored at all. They're just happy to have at it, a pile of dirt, whatever it is. The rich man can't see himself without his attachments. The children can. I mean, right? Children just don't care. I mean, there are 2 classes of people that don't care. The very young and the very, very old, right? When we're very young, we don't care what we look like. When we get to a certain age, if we got black socks and Bermuda shorts and a plaid shirt, we don't care. We don't care what we look like. We just are. If our hair's messed up, so what? The child will accept their place in the world, whether rich or poor. Now, you see this in children. You go into a place where it's very poor. Look in some of these refugee camps, and you see children there. What are they doing? They're playing. They don't care that mom's out there cooking over a pot, hanging over a fire with some sticks underneath it. To them, this is just life. They just accept it as it comes. The rich man does not. He surrounds himself with all kinds of things that give him the world he wants to live in. The rich will look for the next thing that they can buy. Why is that? Because they've lost the sense of wonder that a little child has. Child goes out, a cat. Wow. I remember when, Jackson was really small. And when I got home from work about 5 o'clock, it was Jackson and Daddy until he went to bed every day. And I thank the Lord that we were at a place in life where I could do that. But I would come home, and this time of the year, just like this time of the year, we had these flowers that bloomed in our yard. We didn't plant them, they were just there. And I guess they probably crept under the fence from the next door neighbor who had lots of flowers. And they were strange. One of them was a flower called lantana, if I'm correct. Little yellow and pink flowers. And another one was this strange thing. It came up on a stalk, and it had a fuzzy hot dog shaped thing on the end with red spines, really bright red, almost magenta. Well, Jackson wanted to go out and watch what he called the wapses. We would go out, and you can sit in the grass in Pennsylvania because there are no fire ants. And we would go out and sit in front of those bushes and watch wasps and honeybees and yellow jackets and hoverflies come and feed on the nectar that these flowers provided. We'd sit there for a half an hour or sit on the front porch and watch cars go by. Children have this sense of wonder. They can be thrilled with just about anything. And all of these qualities of children do something to us as adults. I was reading an article about Lord Acton from British Parliament. He's no longer with us, but he said a lot of famous things. Lord Acton's the one who said power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's Lord Acton. And he said the greatest moment in his life, now think about this, all the things that he's seen and remembers. His greatest moment in life was when he was in the street in England. There he is, Lord Acton. I mean, we don't call people that in America. And he said, and a little girl came up to me and asked me to tie her shoelace. He said that was the greatest moment in his life, that this little girl would come up to him and just ask for that without any inhibition whatsoever. I remember once when I was traveling We were staying in Colorado Springs. I don't know if you've ever been to Colorado Springs, but it's an amazing place. We were playing at, and I can't remember the university there in Colorado Springs. Anyway, we were playing there and we were staying with a family. We were there for 3 weeks. And the family took us out to what's called the Garden of the Gods. It's a rock formation, sandstone formation. They're in Red Rocks. You ever heard of a concert at Red Rocks? They have a natural amphitheater there on the rocks where they'll have bands and things like that. And they took us, wanted to show us this. I'd never seen it before. And so we were walking. They had 2 little children. Each parent had one of the children in tow. And there was a third one, and they were trying to get us out there. And of course, you don't want children to be unattended when they're that small. It was a 2 or 3 year old little girl. And the father looked at me. Now, I don't know anything about children. I'm 24 years old. What do I know? And the father turns to me and says, "Would you walk my little girl?" And I stuck my hand down. I didn't know what else to do. It was an instinctive sort of thing. And she plopped her hand right into my hand just like that without even a twitch. And we walked about 10 feet, and the father turns back to me and he says, "There's nothing like that, is there?" And here I am 35 years later, I guess it'd be right. And I still remember that moment when that little girl stuck that hand of hers, that pudgy little soft toddler's hand in my hand. There's something about children that they just trust that adults around them are going to be right toward them. And then there's the rich man who is suspicious of this moment. Now, I think there's this very deep similarity between his suspicion and the childlikeness of these children. A very deep similarity. His suspicion is a childlike suspicion that's very deep. It's brought to him by being wounded as an adult through his life. So when he comes to Jesus, he has this deep childlike need to protect himself. A deep childlike need. His independence, the very fact that he's rich, probably is born, as it is for a lot of rich people, out of fear of having and not being able to have. The rich man, though, is also childlike in another way. Look at what he does. Here he is in public. How many of us, I don't know if you like certain country artists or rock and roll artists or whoever you like, whoever you think's really neat. I don't care, or a scientist or whatever it is. But would you run up to them and fall in front of them on your knees in public? This guy just runs up to Jesus in front of everybody and falls down in front of him. That's a pretty childlike thing to do. He's childlike, but there's a limit. There's a limit. And that limit is, when you ask me to do that, that's as far as I'll go. Jesus says, "Sell everything you've got and give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven." He walks away from that. There's a limit. Jesus is trying to grow this person into the adulthood that God sees this person to have. Jesus loved the man. Why did he love him in this way? The Bible says of Jesus that he knew things about people. It says he knew what was in people. I'm going to say as God, he looked at this man and he knew what this man could become. He knew what he could become. And that's the tragedy that you and I live with in our lives with regard to sin. When we sin, we rob God and we rob ourselves of what we could become. I had somebody say to me once, and I know they meant well. They said, "Well, if you hadn't done all those terrible things, you wouldn't be who you are." I said, "You're right, I'd have been better. I'd have been better." There's a lot that I have robbed God of in what I could have become. And we're all doing that. And here's the problem. Here's the problem that the rich man faced. It's the same one we face. It is hard to go forward in life trusting God for what we can become because we don't know what that is. We don't know. What is God going to ask of you, of me, in our lifetime as the future unfolds? We don't have a clue. And so it's hard to become. What we want is to be. That's what we want. right? If we've got something that we're thinking about off in the distance that we want to be that, the becoming aspect of it is all an unknown, but we see the target. It would be a lot better if I could just be that instead of having to become that. And when you couple up God with that picture, it may be that that thing we think we ought to be is not at all what He thinks we ought to be. So there's this gigantic unknown in front of us. Jesus sees things in you, and He sees things in me that we cannot see, nor can anybody else. People might say really nice things to us about something about ourselves. That may not be at all God's perspective on who we are or what it is He wants us to become. One of the most disturbing aspects, and I say this with reverence, but it's true, of being a follower of Jesus is the question, what kind of person does God want me to become? I don't know the answer to that, do you? People say, Rick, what are you called to? Well, I'm called to do this sermon right now, but that's about all I can tell you. Beyond that, I really don't know everything that I'm called to be. I don't know what God's going to ask me to do. What things will God allow into my life, into your life, where He has to use those things to mold us into what He wants us to be, because He can see it. He could see that in this rich man. He loved him. He wanted him to become what he wanted him to become. The rich man said no. That's the problem for us as believers, is that you and I think whatever you want about it. We can think about it however we wish, but in the end, we're asked to continually become throughout our life. We will never arrive. We'll always be asked to become. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to speak.